Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the MACS Pioneer video series. My name is Steve Schaeber, and I'm the manager of service training for MACS Worldwide, the Mobile Air Conditioning Society. Joining me today is our very own Elvis Hoffpauir, President and Chief Operating Officer of MACS Worldwide in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Elvis has been with MACS since the day of its founding in 1981, first serving as Managing Director, then Senior Vice President, and since July 2000 in his current role. He has seen the association through all 40 of its annual conventions, now called the Training Event and Trade Show, and the many hundreds or even thousands of training clinics we've held over the years. He's also an active member of SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, volunteering on the Interior Climate Control Standards Committee. Elvis also continues to work closely with government agencies on behalf of the Society, including the Environmental Protection Agency, and received a Climate Protection Award in 2006. And in a total surprise event at MACS 2020 in Nashville, Elvis received the MACS most prestigious Pioneer Award. Elvis, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
So, like we do with all MACS Pioneer video interviews, we start at the beginning. So tell me, Elvis, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in a little town named Rayne, R-A-Y-N-E, and grew up actually in at an even smaller village called Indian Bayou. After that, moved to Crowley, Louisiana, a huge metropolis, and those places are all right in the heart of Cajun country. So I went to the University of Southwestern Louisiana, and by the way, their mascot was, for the football team, was the Ragin' Cajuns, so that was appropriate. I graduated from USL with a degree in English and psychology, and after that, I decided I really kind of wanted to escape the local environs and see a little bit of the world. So I signed on with the U.S. Air Force in a program they offered then where you could pick an overseas assignment when you signed on. So I had a choice of Japan or the UK, and so I chose the UK.
Yeah. What did you do in the Air Force in England?
I was a communications intercept operator, and I worked for the branch of the service was the U.S. Air Force Security Service. And I was in a little 50-man squadron based in a little, what used to be, or still is, a Royal Air Force base named Chicksands. And we, again, we were in a small squadron, and we had many assignments in the rest of Europe, including quite a few in Germany. And we also had a 2 or 3 week excursion to Sardinia, which was interesting. We lived in tents in a field. But all in all, I really enjoyed every bit of my my service in the Air Force, and actually met and married my wife there. So that made it even better.
Oh, wow. So you met Vanessa in England?
Yep.
Wow. Well, she's from Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, she was from the area that we're currently living in.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's actually an odd thing, but I've heard of that before, where people, from, basically one part of a country, they meet in far off distant lands and end up, getting together.
Yeah. She was training to be a Russian linguist. So at first she went to Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And I was assigned to a base in Texas for training called Goodfellow. And then we both met at Goodfellow because she had continuing training there. And so that's when we first got together. And then I went overseas. I went to England, and shortly thereafter, Vanessa was assigned there. So
wow,
we spent
that's awesome.
Great years there.
Yeah. So what happened when well, actually, I'm going to ask you this first. Communications Intercept? That
Yeah,
sounds like spy stuff.
well, no, it was, well, actually, Vanessa was a Russian linguist. She served in the 6900th Squadron, also based at Chicksands. But my organization actually flew to U.S. Bases, again, all over Europe. And we were tasked with studying the communication security on the base and then giving a report to the base commander. He was actually the only one that knew when we were operating on base. Of course, the base commander had to be informed. But what we did was we monitored radio communications for missions that the paratroopers were doing and places people were flying, and to see if they would telegraph or reveal their missions in advance. We also, on Air Force bases, at least at that time, every telephone had a warning label on it saying, the phone was subject to monitoring. And that's what we did. We'd hook into the switchboard on bases, and we'd have a number of recording stations set up, and we could toggle through many conversations that were occurring online. Just quite often, guys would call their girlfriends and say, "Hey, I'm on a Halo mission tonight," or whatever, and that's not good. So
right.
it was all in peacetime when I was there, but the unit had been deployed prior to me getting there for one of the big Mideast conflicts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess after that, you came back to the United States.
Yeah, we both had done pretty much our 4 years at the end of our 3-year stint in England, and so we decided we would get out of the service at that point and seek our fortunes elsewhere. So we originally moved back to Crowley, which is, again, my hometown. And Ness went to college there. And I started writing for a couple of local newspapers. Both two of my brothers had been in the newspaper business and been reporters. And so it was kind of a natural with me with my college training in English. It kind of made sense. So I worked as a reporter in Crowley for a while, and then I was moved over to being editor of a small paper in Abbeville, Louisiana, and did that for about 3 years. And I think Vanessa was missing her hometown and her folks. And so we decided to move to Pennsylvania, and I started looking for work there. And it was in 79, August 79, a local trade association had put an ad in the paper looking for an assistant to the managing editor of an organization called IMACA, which is International Mobile Air Conditioning Association. They had moved their headquarters up to Pennsylvania. They decided to move back to Dallas, and at that time, we were co-located with National Automotive Radiator Service Association. So I kind of segued into working for NORSA for a couple of years, exclusively for NORSA. And when MACS was formed, it began formation in 79. And then MACS was incorporated in 1981, and I'd been working on the formation of that group from the beginning, really. MACS was formed or conceived to represent the service sector of the mobile air conditioning trade. IMACA had, which was a long-standing organization, but their emphasis had been more on installation of air conditioning back before it was almost 100% in all automobiles. And their emphasis was more on the aftermarket manufacturers. I think they basically founded the group. So there had never been a strong organization to represent specifically the service sector. And that's what MACS was originally conceived to do.
Right. Who hired you at iMac?
Well, Stan Rodman was the executive director at that time of NARSA and MACS. And
Okay.
actually, Stan didn't interview me. It was a woman named Doris Seymour, who was director of operations for, for both groups, really. And then I was interviewed by Paul Allen, who was at that time managing director of AMACA. And so came on board and went from there.
Wow. So who was the first person to ever utter the word MACS?
I don't know. Paul may have come up with it because not really sure. It probably was a joint effort between the 12 or 15 people who originally conceived and kicked in to form the organization. So can't really say where the name came from.
Yeah. Did the name go through different iterations over time before everyone settled on Mobile Air Conditioning Society, or?
Not really. It was, I recall seeing a list of about 15 or 20 possibilities, and some of them were pretty off the wall. And
Really?
so I think MACS was a pretty much of a shoe-in from the beginning.
Yeah.
Some of them were long and would have been tough to get onto a logo.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. You know, my involvement with MACS and the training events and the conventions really started about 7 or 8 years ago. But I've always been curious about what it was like in the very beginnings, the first years of the convention. I mean, because you guys started doing them in 1981, right?
Yeah, actually, we began as a very small tabletop show. There were no booths involved, and it was a much shorter period of time. It still had, there was an emphasis on training by the original equipment manufacturers. So we always had a strong training support for our members. And, but the show was much smaller, and it kind of steadily grew over the years.
Do you remember which one was the biggest show we ever had?
Probably in Las Vegas. To support both the membership and trade show participation and everything really took off with the requirements for technicians to be certified. So it dates from that period. And that continued as all of the developments related to the new refrigerant and retrofitting of systems and all of those kind of things created a lot of interest in the organization and a thirst for information and for what's going to happen next. So I guess from 1994 through 2000, it was kind of a growth curve. Each year, the shows tended to get bigger and participation greater.
Yeah. You know, during the first, I'm thinking 10 years, really, until, because if MACS started in 81 and the changeover to R134A really started to ramp up in 91 and 92. So during those first 10 years, just in my thought, that was, you know, the smaller training event, the smaller trade show, until a lot of activity started up with our industry, with technicians wanting to know more about R12's effect on the atmosphere, the switch to R134A, how the technology was changing. So what was it like during those first 10 years?
Well, the trade shows were obviously much smaller than they finally grew to be. We struggled to maintain solvency probably in those first 10 years. It was really quite a challenge, and we relied heavily on training, small regional and local training events held at member shops primarily. And that's kind of where we began to build momentum.
Wow. Who ran those shows? It was you, right?
In the beginning, it was our executive director was Simon Ulahujian, and he was the fireball who prompted much of the energy around the MACS organization. He was a great people person, and so he was able to enlist a lot of people to help grow the organization.
Yeah. Was he involved from the very beginning?
Yes, yes, he was.
Yeah.
Simon had, I tell you, there were close ties, certainly in the beginning, between NARSA and MACS. And Cy was a past president and had been very active in the NARSA organization. So he brought a lot of those contacts he had developed over the years into the MACS organization. So that was a big boost for the group.
Yeah. So where was Baxter in those first few years?
Actually, we've always been right around this area. We started in this area because, again, Stan Rodman had a home here, and he lived in Bucks County. And so we wanted to bring the headquarters for both organizations, keep them local. So as far as headquarters, I think we moved probably about 4 or 5 times, each time to a larger organization, but we leased space along, MACS leased space along with NARSA, and became, starting out as a much smaller entity at first, and then growing in size to where we were pretty much equal with NARSA as far as membership and activities and everything else. So we really complemented each other for quite a while. And then, as you know, we finally ended up buying our own building and setting up a training center in Lansdale. But from the time I came on board until present, we moved, I guess, 5 times.
Yeah. Do you know where was the first building that you worked at?
First building I worked at was in Lansdale, just a different part of Lansdale.
Yeah.
But we occupied office building right off the turnpike in Lansdale, and then later moved to another headquarters on North Broad Street. We're on South Broad now. And then we moved out to Pittsburgh for several years.
Yeah. So how did you first get involved with SAE?
I accompanied Simon. Simon was an active member of SAE for many years. And I attended with Simon, and as you know, Steve, it takes a while to get to know the players, get to know the people involved there. And so at first to be honest, I wasn't that enamored of participation in SAE because I'm not an engineer, and I was not familiar with the different people. I came to understand that it's a fantastic organization and met some super people who have been very helpful to me through SAE. But I got to be honest, it's like the first couple of times I tended to kind of want to nod off.
Yeah, some of the meetings can be a little, a little dull. How did Ward get involved with MACS?
He, because of the transition from 12 to 134A, Dr. Anderson had invited MACS to participate in some focus groups to determine what could be done to limit emissions from automobiles. And MACS was involved in studies to determine if refrigerant could be recovered and recycled in the field and then reused and to meet specs required by the OE car makers and component manufacturers. And that study proved successful, and so that launched the whole kind of a new technology of recovery and recycling. And developments along those lines also impacted development of testing tools, and the leak detection equipment was developed related to that, and certainly refrigerant identification when we started having up to 20 refrigerants that were approved by EPA, although many of them were never manufactured. But there was a lot of kind of unique refrigerants floating around in the marketplace. And so all of a sudden, you couldn't just expect that a particular refrigerant was in use. You had to begin testing. So there was another technology that the situation required.
Right. So MACS is most well known for our Section 609 program. And you were the key author in writing a lot of that material in the late 1980s.
Yeah, I developed the first draft based on the environmental science and what we knew about at that time with automotive emissions. And as you know, Ward Atkinson was also active in that effort in developing the technical details related to that and some of the issues for developing the certification tests that were involved.
Yeah, that work took place in the late 1980s, but it was the 1990 Clean Air Act that made a lot of that federal law.
Right. We developed the certification program as a prototype, really, and had launched it before it was even required or approved. We had begun certifying technicians before the final requirement came out. And all of those certifications were grandfathered in. And actually, the EPA recognized in the draft of the Clean Air Act that our program prototype should serve as a sample for other organizations to use.
Wow. Well, here's something I'd like to know, because I do so much work on this. How did the MSR come about, or MACS service reports?
It, like everything else, it went through an evolution too. Originally, Paul Allen had drafted it. And then Paul was later hired by a company called Draft Industries and moved out of the association business. So when we lost Paul as the technical writer for that, Dan Marinucci wrote a number of issues. And then Paul Weissler was contacted pretty early in the game. And he's, as you know, he's still very active in producing MSRs. But he was the first longtime technical correspondent that came on board with MACS.
Yeah. This is another thing I'm curious about. What's the iMac program that I've heard about, which I think it took place in the late 1990s?
Early 2000s, I believe.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was ongoing for about 5 years, as I recall. And again, Dr. Anderson with US EPA was a prime mover in establishing that program. EPA funded it in part, as did a number of the OE manufacturers. But the efforts were to study 5 different aspects of refrigerant emissions, the design of systems, design of components.
This next question to me seemed to be a big development for MACS publications. And that was the launch of what we have today, Action Magazine. Prior to that, Action used to be just a newsletter, right?
Right. Action was a small newsletter published monthly. And we actually, MACS shared in the Narcissus magazine. We wrote the AC segment of the Automotive Cooling Journal. And when we moved our base of operations and bought our own headquarters, there was more of a division of those two groups. We no longer were participating in the Automotive Cooling Journal, and we needed a standard publication to carry the message. And so that's when Action Magazine was conceived. And we hit the ground running with initially 7 issues a year and then 8. But we brought in friends from the Automotive Journal Design section to give us a helping hand with design and layout. And of course, we always generated the content in-house. But that's been quite a success for us over time.
Yeah. Outside of MACS, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I guess I've always enjoyed reading, and since I was a young kid, I was consumed everything in our local library, and I still enjoy that as a pastime daily. I love to go surf fishing every chance we get, and I don't know, nothing really specific other than those.
Yeah. Surf fishing is cool, though. I haven't done that in years.
Yeah. Well, we haven't for the last couple of years either, but we love to go down to North Carolina and fish.
Around your license plate on your car, there's a little tag that says Topsail Island. What's that all about?
Topsail's a great little tiny buffer island just off the coast of North Carolina, near Wilmington, actually. And we discovered it probably 20 years ago. One of our great friends through NARSA, Charlie Braswell, had a place down there. And I was down there for a MACS training event, and Charlie invited me to come stay at his home on Topsail. And it was love at first sight. I just kind of immediately was drawn to the place. And so we've been going, Vanessa and I try to go back at least once a year and spend a week there. And it's tremendous relaxing, watching the dolphins and the surf. And every once in a while we'd be bothered by fish biting. But it's just a great way to relax, and great place to spend some time.
Yeah. And a nice change from the Philadelphia suburbs.
Yeah. Quite a change.
Yeah. Well, what do you see happening in the future of air conditioning systems, or a little closer to home, what do you see happening with the future of MACS?
Well, I think both the industry and MACS are going to continue to evolve. And MACS will largely mirror what's happening in the industry. You and I know that we've been talking about hybrid and electric vehicles for years and years, and the fact that they're just around the corner. It seems like they're still just around the corner. No one has embraced them exactly wholeheartedly, because of the battery limitations and various and sundry. But obviously, in the training that we've offered in electric and hybrid vehicles, obviously they have impact on the cooling systems and on the air conditioning systems for the vehicles. So there's new technology, a lot of new training required associated with that, and new service procedures, the whole thing. So I think we'll continue to see development in that direction. Probably fairly slow. I mean, we've been dealing with the same air conditioning system in automobiles for many, many years. And while some things changed, like the refrigerants, a lot of the things have remained the same. The technology is the technology. And a challenge for our service industry is the fact that every year the systems are made much better, much tighter, and don't fail as often. So again, that if your livelihood is servicing air conditioning and repairing those that fail, obviously the less that fail, the less work you have. So you have to branch out into other things, which our members have done pretty successfully.
I would imagine that back in the beginning, there was a lot more member shops that focused specifically on air conditioning work.
Yeah, at one time back when I first came aboard in the late 70s, early 80s, there was still a fairly robust AC installation market. I guess they were called distributors in that time, but Some cars would come with AC and some without. And then the customer, whoever was buying the car, decided they wanted air, so they would have add-on air added. So some of our people did that. Also accessories, a lot of installation of accessories associated. They would kind of go hand in hand with AC installations.
Yeah. What'd you think of getting the Pioneer Award? Did you expect it?
No, it was a total shock. And one of the directors pointed out that I was actually listed on the menu thing on the other side. I never even looked at it. But it was, I was ready to introduce the guest speaker for the event, and Andy pops in and says, "Oh, we got one more award." And
we have one add-in Pioneer Award that was not on the agenda today. Well, secretly it was. But, we're going to honor Elvis as a pioneer. We think Elvis didn't know about this. We hope he didn't know about it anyways. But Elvis is the youngest of the family.
It totally blew my mind. I never expected that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's well deserved. And, you know, you've been around for a long time and have really been, you know, chronicling our industry and what's been happening. And you're the guy who really formed MACS. I mean, there was a lot of industry players as well, but who was the guy in the office making things happen on a daily basis for the last 40 years? I mean,
well, thank you for saying that.
Everyone's a pioneer in their own right when you spend as much time working in an industry as we all do.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got guys that have, you know, started service businesses from the ground up. You've got other guys brilliant inventors that came up with some of the tools and the parts on the cars that we use every day. We don't even think about it, but somebody invented it. And a lot of those are members of MACS.
Yeah.
And then you've got, as simple as people may think of it, the formation and the development of MACS itself. So for that, thank you very much.
Well, that's great to hear.
Did I miss anything? Do you want to talk about anything?
I was going to suggest, though, Steve, you said you wanted to maybe do something on the history of MACS.
Yeah, and I was actually, while we were, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, maybe we can put the two things together, you know?
Yeah, because you are the history of MACS, Elvis. I mean, let's face it, right? Yeah. You are the history of MACS. I mean, you made everything happen since the beginning. So,
well, at least the chronicler. And yeah. I was there from the beginning. I wasn't the mover and shaker from the beginning, but that role grew over time. You know.
Yeah, it grows, it changes, but you know, the movers and shakers point to people and say, get this done for me. And, you know, so you got to kind of look at it. Who's the one that pointed and who's the one that did, right? But it was really more about the structure of MACS, the organization, and the board of directors, because you serve as the president of MACS, which to us on staff, you know, you run the office, you run the daily operations of MACS. But you're also a member of the board of directors.
Yeah, I'm an ad hoc member of the board by virtue of the office of president. But I always congratulate and am very thankful for the directors we've had over the years, because many really good, talented people have served the role of director of MACS, and they brought a lot to the party over time. And there's no way I could name them all, but there were a lot of people that have been instrumental in the development and the growth of the association and its service to the members. So,
right. Well, that's about all the time we have for right now. Elvis, I'd like to thank you for hanging out with me today and taking part in the MACS Pioneer video series, and for all that you do for our industry and MACS member shops.
Well, thank you, Steve. It was it's a pleasure, and an honor to be in service to the members.
I'm sure that each MACS member will appreciate your information and insights, and hopefully it can help them with their business. Well, that wraps it up for this MACS Live Chat. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, we'd like to thank you for your continued membership with MACS. To find out all that your association has to offer, including our affinity programs designed to help save your shop money, please visit our website at www.maxw.org. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Steve Schaeber, and we'll see you next time.